To begin with, a very good evening and at the same time, a very good morning to all of you. Just take it as it applies to your respective places. So I extend my warm welcome to all of you in this session 2 of the symposium, particularly to Rajiv and all the discussants, and of course, the others in the audience who are there, participating in this session. So I'm certainly delighted to meet you all on this occasion. So the presenters that we have today for this session are Amrit Mishra, Najam Tahir Kheli, Radhika Rajiv, and Sohini Dasgupta. So I've named all the presenters in order of their presentations as our schedule for this session. And in a short while from now, we would begin with Amrit Mishra, who would be reflecting on love and the self in the poetry of Mirza Ghalib, an existential approach. Well, Ghalib, which happened to be the poet's pen name, remains one of the most revered poets of the Indian subcontinent. So I'm certainly eager to listen to Amrit as to how he sort of analyzes the themes of love and the self. The two quintessential themes in the poet's work, in fact, we could say. Our next presenter is Najam Tahir Kheli, who would be a speaker on reflections on the shrinking role of the Pashtun communal hujra, modernity, and Ibn Khaldun's Sabya. Now, Ibn Khaldun was a great Arab scholar of Islam, a social scientist, a philosopher, and a historian who has been described as the founder of the modern disciplines of historiography, sociology, economics, and demography, and who believes that the state has its foundation as one of the two great moral principles, the sense of oneness or group mind, that is a sabya, and religion. The state as such is the natural result of human life, which requires association and organization. That is human association is necessary. And the philosopher expresses this by saying man is a citizen by nature. So I'm inquisitive to hear Najam talking about the shrinking or the declining role of the hujra in the Pashtun society in the light of Khaldun's philosophy of Sabya. The next speaker to speak would be Radhika Rajiv, who would present on the topic the self, masculine, feminine, or genderless. Now, the question is certainly intriguing and unsettling at the same time, since it does not have a ready solution, right? In fact, it may bear larger implications than we can perhaps think of. Well, gender neutrality, also known as gender neutralism, or the gender neutrality movement, is the idea that policies, language, and other social institutions, that is, social structures, gender roles, or gender identity, should avoid distinguishing roles according to people's sex or gender. This is in order to avoid discrimination arising from the impression that there are social roles for which one gender is more suited than another. And so I'm looking forward to how Radhika comes to theoretically handle a question that remains one of the most baffling problems of our times. Next, we would turn to Sohini Dasgupta for her paper on is the identity of Bengali language and its dialects at a turn of the screw, a study of linguistic marginalization and distortion. I cannot wait to listen to her analyzing the stark truths underlying her interrogation here as to the serious threat that is posed to the language due to the predominance of a number of socio-political, socio-economic, and socio-cultural factors that need an engaged reflection. no question, would perhaps have been more pertinent in today's globalized world, where not only is the world shrinking, but also are its cultures shriveling, for better or worse. And so I think these questions need to be enhancingly delved into, not only to discover the problem, but also find a possible solution to them. I would quickly end my note by a few remarks on the title of the session, that is Identity in the Post-Human. So this form of new humanism, as we might call it, has proved to be noteworthily and creatively provocative, since an overwhelming concern with the Anthropocene has caused our notion of identity to go beyond all conventional understanding of the human. The post-human subject is not only post its human stage of existence in its mind and body, but is also one of the species that exist in the world in correlation to each other. The transition is phenomenal, since it has sought to deconstruct the ideas of identity, subjectivization, and anthropocentricity. It ensures a form of hybridization and even convolution of the materiality of humanness by apparently denying the anthropological forms of evolution of man. The post-human subject is seldom a finished entity. 'Tis rather a form of existence whose identity is in the making. Hence, the idea can be said to be still evolving, and we would have to wait to see the many manifestations of the post-human that are to be unfolded with time. So with those remarks, let's begin with the session. I would request the presenters to introduce themselves first before they begin with their papers. So Amrit, you may proceed with your discussion now. May I go over to Amrit to begin the session with his paper? Yeah.
Hello, I hope I'm audible clearly. Is that fine?
Yeah, perfectly.
Yeah, so I'm Amrit Mishra and I'm doing my research in EFL Hyderabad in the English Literature Department. I have worked 3 years now, and the research basically deals with existentialism and its influence in India and on Indian literature. So this reading of Mirza Ghalib that I have done in this paper is not the first time I'm dealing with, the kind of literature which is counted as shairi, or which is counted in some sense, influenced by the Islamic metaphorical set that is used. I don't know whether I'm exactly correct in using the term Islamic metaphorical mindset, because Kabir also did the same thing. But here I have focused on two things: love and the self. And I would like to make it very clear that there are only two kinds of loves that I'm talking of. One is the personal man-woman love. It's not man-man love, because those are the other ways of thinking about love today. But when Ghalib was writing this, he was most precisely either writing about man-woman love or about man and God love. These are the two, I think, in my understanding, ways in which Ghalib was talking about it. So the first aim that the reading of the poetry of Mirza Ghalib helps us with is self-realization. And this is where I think it becomes most existential, because it connects us to our own desires. I would start with the first couplet that I have noted here. The paper is slightly largish, so I will not be reading the whole paper in order not to bore you all. The couplet goes like this: मोहब्बत मोहब्बत में नहीं है फर्क जीने और मरने का, उसी को देख कर जीते काफिर पे दम निकले. Now the word usage here is interesting, because he says there is no difference between living and dying once you are in love. So somewhere we cross the existential boundary of the fear of death. Death is considered something which will stop us from realizing ourselves, and in all religions death is thought of as an end. But Ghalib says that once you are in love, the fear of dying goes away, and we somehow are able to live in a sense of completion, whether it is sadness or happiness. Just because we have our beloved beside us, we will be happy about the very presence of that person. Now, whether he's talking of falling in love with God or falling in love with your personal beloved is always a dualistic writing of Ghalib. That's what makes his poetry universal, I feel. It's not just about personal love, but also about divine love. Then there are a few keywords which give us a better understanding of Ghalib's poetry. He is trying to find out the authentic self of the person who falls in love. Authenticity is a very key theme in existentialism and in the writing of Ghalib, because he is concerned with themes like when we fall in love, are we honest in a conjugal relationship? Are we true to our partner or not? This is a very pertinent theme in Ghalib's writing. Now, there's a very peculiar way he thinks of work and not working. In one of his couplets, he writes, इश्क ने गालिब निकम्मा कर दिया वरना हम भी आदमी थे काम के. Now here, the intent is not that he's somehow saying that if you are an idler, you are a better person. What he's saying is that my focus on my beloved is so unshaken that it will not change for any material requirements of the society. What has happened to the 21st century is that we have understood love in very material terms. That's because human potential is understood in terms of the things that we possess. And we tend to think of love also in terms of how much we can get from our partner, whether it is money or prestige or anything else. So that is where he is talking of a more deeper level of love, where you do not belong to a person because you expect certain money or certain prestige or position, just because you purely love that person and want to be with that person. The other couplet which I would like to point out is इस सादगी पे कौन ना मर जाए ए खुदा लड़ते हैं और हाथ में तलवार भी नहीं. Now I'm reading intentionally these couplets in Urdu or Hindi because I don't want to take away the essence of the original couplet. The translations basically kill the meaning of the poem or the couplet, so to say. So he's talking of simplicity and love here. And simplicity is a very, very existential theme. The whole struggle for an existentially believing person is to make yourself as simple as possible, because the things that we are surrounded by, the thingness of our surroundings, has made us so dependent on technology, on money, on possessiveness, that we forget ourselves in the way. And somehow Ghalib is actually offering us an alternative to fall in love without planning. That's what I think is the import of Ghalib's writing of his poetry. He's not planning his love before he's falling in it. He's actually writing about the act of quote unquote falling in love. Uh, then again, this one more thing. उनके देखे से जो आ जाती है मुंह पे रौनक, वो समझते हैं कि बीमार का हाल अच्छा है. This encounter between the lover and the beloved is that when you look at your beloved, you smile, but that smile is actually also full of anxiety, because that anxiety is born out of what is going to happen in the future. Once I tell my beloved that I love her, how is she going to react? This feeling or the intentionality of the human individual is a very, very existential emotion, because we are thinking about what is going to happen to us in our future, and that in itself creates an anxiety. And this is such a human emotion that no matter how much you achieve, because the reason is, once we love someone, we look up to that person, and that creates this gap between the desire and the reality. Before you have actually taken the authentic decision of opening up about your love to your partner, that moment of anxiety is actually an existential moment about which Ghalib is talking. इशरत एक कतरा है दरिया में फना हो जाना, दर्द का हद से गुजरना है दवा हो जाना. Now, this is also a very important idea. Generally, existentialism is blamed because it is considered pessimistic and sad and something which is not positive and nihilistic. But here, Ghalib somehow shows the positivity of understanding love existentially. Because if we accept pain and pleasure as part of life, then we have a sort of equanimity when we deal with pain and pleasure both. And then we are able to heal ourselves. love is something which heals us. And this I can tell you from personal experience. This kind of makes me emotional, and makes me want to dedicate it to someone. But that's going a bit too personal. Maybe on a group chat later on. इशरत कतरा है दरिया में फना हो जाना. So this idea of dissolving yourself into the sea and becoming one. This again is an idea of non-duality, and Ghalib was very, very conscious of the non-dual self. He was very conscious of falling in love, then somehow becoming non-dual with the surroundings around you. The main problem that we have found ourselves in today, even in this pandemic, is that we have brought ourselves to this situation where we have tired ourselves by saying I all the time. I want this, I want that. The moment you fall in love, you give a part of yourself to the other. And that is what he's talking of here. The katra is nothing but a drop of water which becomes one with the sea. So that wholeness is experienced once you fall in love. Uh, in some sense, personally speaking, when I found the person I love, I felt that I became better than who I was. And I started growing. I think this is what Ghalib is also talking about. For Sufis, the same experience can be with God, because they live their life with this desire that they want union with God. So as the professor was pointing out earlier today, when they die, they think of it as union with God, because I don't think the earthly medium is so pure anymore that God would ever want to come back. And in that, I agree with the existentialists. I don't think God is ever coming back.
Oh my God.
uh, do I have some more time, or I'm over time already?
Well, Rajiv, do we have more time for Amrit to continue?
I was not controlling. I was not controlling that. I thought like you are controlling this.
Okay. Yes. So, I
How long?
guess Amrit can now conclude because it has been minutes. In fact, it had to be some 15 minutes.
Yeah,
So I guess we have reached that limit. So Amrit, could you please conclude then? Yeah.
I knew cannot read and would not read the full paper. So the idea is that somewhere, because of being from India, he has taken the Indian non-dual approach to writing, and he has talked of a self which is united in love. It's not like the current form of love where you want to possess the other but become one with the other. This is what I think is different in Ghalib's writing from how the younger generation is perceiving love today. That will be my final comment on the paper. Thank you.
Okay, great. So that was a very impassioned address to love, I would say. And as Rajiv was saying in his introduction today, that ishq or love, constitutes the essentiality of human life, which makes human life better, and which of course has the power in fact to ameliorate the society at large. So that was extremely interesting, Amrit, and I saw that passion in you, and the very truthfulness with which you were speaking. So just a question, I mean, before opening the floor for questions, what do you think? I mean, how does Ghalib then negotiate the two kinds of love that he speaks over here, that is physical on the one hand and divine on the other? So is he in a, I mean, I'm curious to know whether he is in a kind of artistic dubiety of not being able to draw a line of agreeability between the two, or is he looking for a kind of a negotiation between the two in order to achieve, that transcendentality of existence? So that is one. And the other thing is, you were talking about non-duality. Now, when we are, really thinking of two people in a particular relationship, then how could we envisage that non-duality? Because, two loves can make a whole universe, right? I mean, these two hemispheres, if we go back to John Donne, I mean, and the metaphysical poets, they conceived of one whole universe where two hemispheres of that universe become one in love. So what would you comment on that? I mean, the non-duality that is conceived by Ghalib in love. Yeah, so these are the precise two questions. Yeah.
Focus on the transcendentalism aspect. His idea is that, I think from the reading is that he's trying to say that once you love someone truly, and your love raises above the level of the physicality of a person and the achievements, material achievements of a person, then you get involved with that person on a level which is beyond the physical. And I think that experience itself becomes a medium to spiritually connect with at least your better self, if not God. Because nowhere does he actually mention the word Allah or God or anything. I think he's just talking of a higher level of being, and that can be achieved once we are honest with our whatever our desire is, whether it's a human being, ideally, because the words that he uses, he uses words like the Ifrat and Katra and Ishq for lovers, and the sadness and the same kind of pain when your lover departs. That is a very human love. It doesn't appear to be very Sufist love. There is, however, a gap and moments where we feel that he may be talking of both the kinds of loves. But nevertheless, I think he's thinking of this as first going through the human to the God. He's not thinking of directly into God. He's thinking through human to God. That's my perception of his way of reaching transcendental love. To speak of the other part of the question, where we think of how is it going to be, what was the word, dualistic. So dualism is first of all something which Indians understand better than how they do best. It was adopted from India, and the earliest Indian religious texts already have the concepts of dualism. And thinking of the kind of oneness which is non-material, which is beyond death, which is the kind of oneness where even if we don't possess our beloved, we don't stop loving that person. So Virha, as one of the speakers was talking of today, is not a moment of actual breaking up. You know, the whole idea of a breakup is a modern concept, which again is a modern, Western modern concept, which has somehow filtered into India. Love, or not just India, so to say, for the eastern part of the world, is a more involved, intimate experience, and that's why people are more spiritually involved. You know, going to God for asking for a love. These things are generally not done in more materialistic society. So therefore, he's talking of a non-dual self where you give a part of yourself to your partner, and you expect that part to grow once it is with your partner. That kind of combined dualism that he's talking about. And yes, there is a becoming better.
Okay, okay, great. Interesting answers. So, yes, I would now like to ask if anyone has a question, can type in the box over here, or may be vocal about his or her questions. So, anyone's...
This is Professor Bruce. I just want to ask one question about the overall theme of this conference, which is in one way exploring identity. And one of the great questions about Ghalib is whether his poetry is transformative or is escapist. In other words, is he transforming himself, or is he escaping from the brutal realities of post-1857 Delhi, which he had to live through? And so his poetry, instead of becoming a window for the future, becomes a nostalgic reflection on the past. And so how would you address those two different issues about Ghalib as the ultimate seeker, the one who looks for non-dual identity through poetry, but Ghalib also who's the defeated, if you will, Muslim advocate for the Mughal throne, who's been defeated by 1857 India and has to live in the shards of Delhi rather than its glories?
Very good question. Escapism, I think, is the question complete? Yeah, so I can go. The escapism part, I don't think he's trying to escape on a personal level. He's talking of experiences which are very universal. His Muslim identity, nevertheless, is only visible in his vocabulary, which every time he writes becomes universal. So if he uses a word like katra, it's our responsibility as readers to understand katra. Just because we are not Muslims, we can't give the excuse that we don't understand your part of the world and therefore your love is not applicable to us. The political part of it, and he's missing out on Delhi not being a safe city when he was living on the margins. I think that has always been the fate of most great poets, because poets do not like to say things which please people. Ghalib was never that kind of a person, and he would accept that love has pain, and accepting and in accepting that love has pain, he has clearly also pointed out the dual nature of love itself. That if you get happiness, you will get pain along with it. So he is a person who is able to look through the depth of love as and I've my paper that love is which or creates a lot of conflicting emotions within our mind, and then it is our personal responsibility to authentically fix those emotions and bring the best out of us once we are in true love. And Ghalib is writing of a universal in my perception, he's writing of a universal experience here. He's not writing only from his Muslim identity.
Okay, great. Thank you, Professor Bruce, for the question. Thanks, Amrit, for the answer. So I think we could go over to the next presenter. That is Najam Tahikili. Is he there? Yes. We can see Najam. So yes. You can begin with your presentation, Najam. We are really looking forward to your discussion. Yeah.
Thank you, dear professor. Hello, everybody. Assalamu alaikum. Or namaste, hoş geldiniz, bakhair agli, ahlan wa sahlan, whatever language you speak. My name is Najam Tahir. I am a master's student in civilization studies at Ibn Haldun University in Turkey. And part of my thesis research has been studying Pashtun culture and modernization. And from that, I derived an academic paper that, a presentation that I'll present now. So let me share my screen. Just one moment, please. Okay, do you guys see this? All right, I need to open this and make it. Okay, does everybody see my screen?
Okay, does everybody see my screen?
All right.
Yes, Najam, you can go ahead. It's perfectly visible. Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, so my topic is reflections on the shrinking role of Pashtun cultures. Reflections on the shrinking role of the Pashtun communal hujra, modernity, and Ibn Khaldun's Asabiya. So first, the Pashtuns are an ethnic group that belong to large parts of Afghanistan and the frontier regions of Pakistan. And if I'm not mistaken, there's around 70 million Pashtuns in the world. So let me go to the next slide. So before I begin, I want to share my personal experience sitting at a hujra in the Pashtun culture. One day, I was going to a hujra with a friend and my driver, and an elderly man received me, and he sat me next to him and held my hand and said, "Young man, welcome to my hujra." And quickly, there were people in the hujra already, and they sat around us. And this elderly man, he went and asked one of his attendants to go and prepare food for me. And so they were preparing many foods and so forth. And as the hujra progressed, the man was telling me a story about somebody named Bacha Khan, who comes from the, during the British colonial context. He was a sort of a nonviolent, peaceful protester against British rule. And he was sharing wisdom with me on who Bacha Khan was, what he did, because he saw him with his own eyes. And at the end of it, we had food, we had much discussion, and I learned many things from him. The reason I'm sharing this story is to show you that a hujra is a sort of cultural institution where men sit together and they discuss various matters. But in addition to that, this hujra is far more vast than just this. It is a millenniums-old cultural institution of the Pashtuns, which existed probably as much as the 5,000-year-old history of Pashtuns in themselves. Although the word hujra is an Arabic word, it actually has many different words, and depending on which region you are in Afghanistan or in Pakistan. And this hujra, it is a sort of a local community center for men to perform many functions. So it is a men-only community center or area, and certain functions such as receiving guests, sharing of wisdom and knowledge, resolving disputes and arranging community matters, celebrating and mourning, enjoying music and conversation, and so many things. What makes the hujra unique is that in one location within a Pashtun community, everything happens there, right? And that's what makes it special. And it is at one of the hallmarks of Pashtun identity. In addition to that, it is where the Pashtun code of conduct, or Pakhtun Wali, is informally taught. And this is an example of a photo of a hujra where people are sitting on the floor. And this was very similar to the hujra that I attended when I was having food and learning wisdom from one of the elders. Now, the question is, what is happening to the hujra and why? First, as I mentioned, this is a very important cultural institution of Pashtuns. It represents their identity. It teaches their traditional values. Now, the question is, as modernization is occurring, what is happening to it? Through my personal conversations with a handful of Pashtuns, I kept getting a very similar answer from many of them. And they were saying that one of the things that is harming this hujra are actually the cell phones. And they would say the youth have become much more attached to using their cell phones and communicating via that technology, instead of going to a physical hujra and sitting down and having what we would call muhabbat, or heart-to-heart conversation and sharing of wisdom. In addition to that, other things such as media is shifting the mindset of the youth. As one expert article I was reading, this cultural expert mentioned that a young Pashtun man will know today what is going on in Hollywood or in Bollywood, but they will not know the new poetry that some poet wrote from their culture, or they will not know the subtleties of why somebody dresses a certain way when they get married. And so now what's happening is the modernization is actually shifting the cultural atlas of the youth. In addition to that, urbanization is impacting the relevance of the hujra. As mentioned, the hujra is a physical space where so many activities occur. But what's happening is that when people move from rural societies into a city, they have less space, less ability to afford to purchase a hujra, and they have less time because they have to work, they have to educate themselves, and so on. And there are also other factors which are impacting the hujra, one of which it's sad to mention, but actually the existence of terrorism that has been happening in the tribal areas of the Pakistan and Afghanistan has negatively impacted the hujra due to the reason that some of these organizations, they would actually attack the hujras. So when they see that a tribal leader is at the hujra, or it is the hujra of the tribal leader, sometimes they would actually attack it and to cause intimidation. So now we have to ask ourselves, what is modernization, right? Because we need to have a working definition of what this is. Based on various scholars, modernization is urbanization, industrialization, democratization, the emergence of an empirical analytical approach to knowledge. This was based on Wagner. You can find this source in my paper. My apologies, I didn't quote it here. Also an increase in bureaucracy and mass communication, as well as post-traditionalism. And this post-traditionalism is where we live in a world where now traditional cultural patterns are not as important as they used to be. They are kind of secondary. And so this is also one of the effects of modernization. Okay, now remember these three things: urbanization, industrialization, and mass communication. Okay, as mentioned, when somebody's moving from the rural area to the city, they don't have space to create a hujra. When industrialization is happening, the perception of time changes, right? One elder mentioned to me when I was speaking to him that in the past, when we lived in a more of an, when they lived in a more of an agricultural-based society, people had more time to participate in the hujra. But today, people have so many more things to do, money to make, and so forth. And finally, mass communication. The invention of the cell phone, the invention of WhatsApp, and all these different channels of communication is making the hujra less relevant. In addition to that, mass media is changing the perspective of the cultural mindset of the youth. Now we have to ask ourselves, okay, what can we do about this? What can we understand about it? And who can help us? Well, I thought that it might be a good idea to go back to what Ibn Haldun mentioned in his theory of Asabiya. Ibn Haldun was a 14th century Muslim Arab, I would say multifaceted philosopher of history. As one of my professors said, he was a multiplex thinker, or in other terms, he was able to understand and give educational insights in so many different subjects, such as history, economy, sociology, and so forth. One of his concepts was the asabiya, which it denotes a concept of social solidarity or connectedness of a social group. Okay, it originally comes from the Arabic word asab, which came from the Qaba'il or the tribal context of the pre-Islamic Arab societies. However, Ibn Khaldun applied the term to, he kind of, I would say, universalized the term and applied it as a sort of social political measure, where in which you can analyze what is the asabiya or the social solidarity of a group of people when analyzing them. And now this asabiya can be based on blood relations, or it can be based on mutual help or connectedness not based on blood relations, for instance. Okay? And within his theory, we have the Badi and the Hadari style of life. The Badi style of life is related to the Bedouin lifestyle, which can be understood as people living outside the city dwellings. Within his specific context, those people who lived in the deserts and the kind of more rugged areas. This poor environment requires more social cohesion and unity, right? And it makes somebody more honest and simple and more fortuitous, and it's closer to the original state of what a human is. However, the Hadari lifestyle, it is more of an urbanized city lifestyle where people are living within city boundaries, where it is safer, there's rule of law, there are better resources. Although these are blessings, there are also issues that come with it, where in which the luxuries can allow a sort of change in the ego, and the person can become more individualistic and less needy of his tribal group or his original group. And this can actually harm asabiya. Okay, and now we have to ask ourselves an important question. Do you think that these modern amenities, such as better city facilities, mass communication, better industries, can this be related to the Hadari lifestyle that Ibn Khaldun spoke of, right? And if so, can we use this as an insight to understand what is going on with the Pashtun Hujra? Because as mentioned, this is an issue that the Pashtun Hujra is a 1,000 years old tradition, but suddenly within just a relatively small amount of time, the relevance of this tradition is slowly going away. So what can Ibn Khaldun help us with that? and what can we understand about modernity when addressing this issue? As a concluding remark, I want us to ask a bigger question, in which can help the Pashtun communities resolve their issues and can help us understand our own issues no matter what culture we're from. And that is, how can a society properly incorporate modern technologies and industries into their social cultural way of life without losing its traditional character? I believe that this is the heart of the issue of understanding what is identity in the post-human era. And specifically, this is a question that can help the Pashtun people understand how to move forward without losing their character. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Okay, great, Najam. I was really enjoying listening to you. That was quite riveting, and an issue that you have picked up in your paper, and certainly you have been able to demonstrate the shrinking role of the Pashtun communal hujra, and how you see the ongoing process of modernization is really posing a threat to this age-old traditional practice. That was wonderful. In fact, while I was listening to you, certain questions came up, in my mind. So, and the first one is, how do you think can the communitarian hujra retrieve their essential identity, from the ongoing process of modernization, as you have said? I mean, including urbanization, industrialization, and mass communication, because these are the inevitable processes that can in fact seldom be prevented, in fact, or precluded. So how do you feel the Pashtun communal hujra actually can live up to these changes in the postmodern society? And how can the philosophy of Asabia redeem the identity of the Pashtun communal hujra? So that is one. And the other is, you see, how can, you were talking about post-traditionalism. So I was thinking of a possible way in which, a negotiation between traditionalism and modernization can perhaps be brought about, in fact, so far as the communal hujra is concerned. So what do you think? Is that possible? And if it is, then how can Asabia play a role in that, Najam?
Okay. So to answer the first question, I believe that, first of all, the Pashtun civil society needs to find this conscience and realization that something is changing, something is happening, correct? And that requires education and a sort of guidance, and in which they can consciously know how to adjust their cultural institutions with modernity. Because, this is a challenge, right? But this is also a great opportunity, right? I forgot who mentioned it at the beginning of our conference, but, I forgot this, when it was it Michael Murphy or something like that? And he mentioned how, like, help me out, Professor Lawrence. I see you, Professor.
Yes, Michael Murphy was the person who I mentioned, Michael Murphy.
Yes. Where in the city, if I understood correctly, when you're living like in a more of a citied area, you kind of have an emptiness, right? This is an opportunity to preserve and save and cultivate a human being within a modern, in a modern context, right? This can be where many people meet and share knowledge. It doesn't have to just be traditional knowledge. It can be the sharing of contemporary issues. A hujra is an institution where you can discuss current community matters, political matters. People who are older can share knowledge, right? So this is something that is an opportunity in where the society can adjust, right? And now when we go to Ibn Khaldun, I remember one scholar mentioned this. He said that, I forgot who it was, but to return back to Ibn Khaldun is in a way to return back to ourselves, right? So for the Pashtun community and the Muslim community, and maybe the world, to understand who Ibn Khaldun was, what he was about, it can give them a sort of consciousness to know how to identify these issues and solve them. And then to answer your final question, that is where we can have an answer to the post-traditional age. To sum it up.
So actually, if I could just intervene for a moment, and say that one of the things that's very inspiring about your talk is this retrieval of the Hujra and its traditional meaning in a post-traditional society. I wonder how you would respond to people who would say, yes, but we're not in a non-traditional society anymore. We're in the modern nation state. And one of the earlier questions was asking about minorities. And at one point you said, isn't Afghanistan really about Pashtuns? And they said, no, there are other groups. And of course, there are other groups. And among those other groups, the Tajiks and Hazaras.
Yes.
So my first question is, do the Tajiks and Hazaras feel excluded, and do they have their own version of Hujra? And of course, the bigger question, which must be in a lot of people's minds, is whatever happened to the women?
Okay.
So this is a male-only institution. How do women respond to it? Do women have the equivalence of it? What's the relationship of women to the Hujra as an institution?
Okay. First of all, I want to make two humble admissions. I am not an expert on Afghanistan, and neither am I an expert on the role of women within the Pashtun society, but I'll try my best to answer, right? The first thing is, of course, this Hujra system, it exists in Afghanistan. Based on my understanding, it is an identity of Pashtun culture. But when we look at the nation state of Afghanistan, there are many other ethnic groups within the nation state of Afghanistan. There are the Turkmen, the Tajiks, and so forth, including the Pashtuns, right? So what is their position with the Hujra? I don't even know whether they practice the Hujra or not, because I have not experienced the Afghan culture within Afghanistan, right? But of course, there's always been intermixing, and there have been other ethnic groups that have always cultured themselves within certain cultural contexts. Now, as the second question, the role of women. Now, that's a good question. You know, based on my observations within Pashtun society, the role of women and the role of men are very firmly specified. It's a very traditional sort of functional way. And it just is not the position of women to be within the Hujra. They have a certain different position. Now, whether that's a good or bad thing, whether that's right or wrong, that's a completely different subject, which I don't have authority over. But that's just the reality. You know, if you went to a Hujra in the Pashtun areas, you would not find a woman. So.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Bruce. That was an extremely important question. Thank you, Najam, for answering that very honestly. So before we conclude with Najam's presentation, there is a question from Halima Ben Said, who is asking, have there been any strategies to reconceptualize the Hujra in its current context? Are there any new situations, maybe even online, that are absorbing the roles played by the Hujras? So, I mean, the Hujras, the communal space. So that's what Halima asked you. Yeah.
Based on my humble and limited knowledge on the Hujra, because as mentioned, the Pashtuns is an ethnic group of 70 million people, right? Based on some of my research, there have been news articles I've read where cultural experts of Pashtun society have called for an effort by the government in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province of Pakistan, where they facilitate the Hujras with more modern facilities, where there's internet connection, there are games and things that the youth would like, where in which also the elders can supervise them, right? So they're trying. So this news article called for this sort of mindset. In addition to that, speaking to one elder, an elder told me, he said that for us, it is okay that our youth go into the universities and study, that they do all these modern things, but they need to also give space and time for the hujra and to spend time with us, right? So the conscience exists. To what level? That's hard to determine.
Okay, great. So I'll just take one more question that Amrit asks, and that is what to do about the charge of medievalism. I guess it's medievalism that is put on any attempt at pre-modern social practices.
Okay.
So that's what Amrit asks. Is the question clear, Najam, or?
The chart. What do you?
Do we ask Amrit to actually, ask it vocally again?
If we have time, go ahead. I think I understand, but if we have time, then you can ask it.
Okay, yes, you can quickly make an answer. Yes, Amrit, could you please specify the question?
One of the charges that has been put against Islam in general, not just the Pashtuns or a particular community, but Islam in general, that it is medievalistic, and or even if we try to revive Hinduism in a non-casteist way, the claim is that we are being medievalistic. So how to deal with this charge of medievalism whenever we try to go to any pre-modern practice to sort of cure ourselves from the modernism that we are falling sick to? That's the question.
Oh, that's a tough question. That's a tough question. I want to put Islam aside, right? Because that requires a whole different set of tools to analyze what you said. As for the Pashtun, maybe the claim that Pashtuns have a very medieval mindset, that's a tough question, and that's a tough claim. And I think I don't have the answer for that. But what is required is for one to actually go there and experience what the Pashtuns are going through, and understand that these are human beings and they're dynamically trying to adjust, right? And how are they doing that? It requires more research, but
thank you.
I don't have an answer. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, yes. Thank you, Najim, for that very absorbing talk. We really enjoyed it. So I hope you would carry on your research on the Pashtun communal hujra and do a wonderful job ahead. So after that, we would move on to our next speaker, who is Radhika Rajiv. And Radhika would present on the topic entitled The Self, Masculine, Feminine, or Genderless. So Radhika, over to you.
I hope I'm audible. So hi everyone, greetings to everyone. And the title of my paper, as Professor Banerjee just said, it's The Self, Masculine, Feminine, or Genderless. And I think it's a great...
Could you please introduce yourself and get into the talk?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Radhika Rajiv, and I completed my master's in English from the English and Foreign Languages University in Hyderabad back in 2019. And right now I work as a language editor, but at the end of the day, I like being in the academic circles and listening to talks and papers and things like that. So yeah, as Professor Banerjee had said in the introductory session, this question is quite baffling and has an impact that lies outside what we perceive today. So I have a short PowerPoint presentation here. I'll just share. Yeah. So this is the title of my paper. So the self as a concept came into the arena of philosophical debate in the 18th century, and that too with the most prominent works of Immanuel Kant and John Stuart Mill. So Kant presented his ethical subject, and Stuart had his, and Miller had his Homo economicus, and both of these models were drawn from a belief that a reason is what makes an individual as in every individual, the self of every individual is defined by rationality. So, these two dominant views remained in the field for quite a long time. I think for till maybe the end of 19th century, when the first wave of feminism came in. And with the first wave of feminism, the self took a central stage in feminist philosophy as feminists started pointing out the misogynism and the sexism that underlie the definitions provided by Kant and Miller. So now, to try to find where the self lies within feminist philosophy, I think that can be best seen in the words of Simone de Beauvoir that I have quoted here. Like, he is the subject, he is the absolute, and she is the other. So with these few words, Simone de Beauvoir has shown how the subjectivity of women has been taken away. Like, women are no longer regarded as the subject here. She has become an object. So, and the aim of feminism has always been to define the self-identity of women by questioning the social structures, individuality, and more importantly, the body of a woman, body and agency of a woman. So, in other words, it tries to define or to give a definition of the self that could include the woman in describing, in giving a general definition of the self. So these are the three main approaches taken up by feminist philosophy to in order to define a new form of the self. The first one is critiquing dominant Western ideas. The second is reclaiming the female identity, and the third one is reconceptualizing the self. So if we look at the history of traditional or conventional philosophy, so we can see that men have always wielded the power, be it social, political, or economical. And again, I think this would again go back to the context of the previous presentation, how men have dominated the fields of culture and again, media, literature, arts, everywhere. So instead of remaining a mere philosophical notion, the self in feminism kind of gets a more social and political dimensions as well. So now going on to the first of the approaches, that is critiquing more dominant Western ideas. As I said, the two most dominant ideas were that of Kant and Miller. So the main assertion against Kant and Miller is that they look at the self as isolated from the environment. So we all grow up in a particular social environment, and we are not removed from that. In other words, our self is actually molded within these contexts rather than away from it. But these factors are not taken into consideration by both these philosophers. So the Kantian ethical subject is actually supposed to use reason to reach the ultimate truth, or basically transcend all social and political barriers to reach the ultimate truth, irrespective of what culture or what sex or what age they belong to. Similarly, Miller's Homo economicus, he's supposed to use reason to put all his desires into a coherent structure and act in such a way that brings about the fulfillment of maximum of his desires. So these theories also kind of ignore the social factors like race, class, and social stratification. So despite Kant and Miller claiming that their prototypes are genderless and ageless, feminist theorists have always pointed out that it is very clearly both the ethical subject and the Homo economicus are a white, maybe a middle-aged, upper class or middle class heterosexual man. So now the feminist philosophers look at the very concept of self as a gendered aspect. So the women have always been confined into the private domain or the domestic space, and they have always been labeled as emotional, irrational, and unable to remain impartial in general. And this labeling is also supported by how they were defined. They were defined as obedient daughters, a supportive wife, or a vulnerable partner, very emotional, compassionate, empathetic. So all these adjectives that are given to women, they also make it convenient for women to be more confined into this space. So in this way, the self also became another male-dominant public domain that females or women had no access to. And the very definition of the self highlighted a good sense, stronger judgments, good principles, a respect for principles and duties, and things like that. And at the same time, femininity was associated with the domestic sphere, as I said, and emotions and sentiments. So saying that rationalism or its reason that defines the self would itself make the self a gendered notion, or another, or more specifically masculine, because reason itself here is labeled as masculine. So the Kantian subject actually involves in a lot of suppression of his own personal desires and personal conflicts, and this suppression kind of creates a projection to the other or the women here in this context. So that creates an irrational kind of hatred and resentment, and that is what makes the Kantian subject a symbol of hatred and resentment. And as far as the Homo economicus is concerned, where the individual kind of gives an order to his desires. So the social contexts where women are raised, generally the values in society are divided on the lines of gender. Like women have different values and men have different values. And in this very context, the women are expected to kind of lower their aspirations, and their dreams are even, I read this in one of the papers that I referred, even dreams are gendered. So in this context, being a Homo economicus would mean women trying to satisfy the lowest of their desires. So in a way, they become a means of furthering their oppression than breaking away from it. So the second point that I wanted to make was about reclaiming the feminine identity. Again, this is something that is very predominant in our philosophy, where women are always victimized and men are regarded as agents. Yeah. So one of the early philosophers, feminist philosophers, who talked against this kind of a notion was Mary Wollstonecraft. She said she was the first one, I think, to claim that values as such have no gender. The very division that I spoke about before is it's basically warping the values that actually exist into making them masculine and feminine. And Simone de Beauvoir is another theorist who has taken up this line of argument. And she says that women are, again, pressurized by the society. They are made to lower their expectations. And then this very society again calls them small-minded and being dependent on the approval of others. So according to her, women can become agents. Women can become transcendental agents only when they have productive careers. I quote her, she uses the term productive careers. The second way of reclaiming the feminine identity is re-evaluating motherhood and caregiving. So motherhood and caregiving has again always been associated with women because of the natural process of reproduction and nurturing. So this motherhood has always been seen as, again, separate from the formation of the self. So the individual is set to detach from the mother, and then he gains autonomy through reason and self-determination and all that. But here, with in the feminist philosophy, the theorists again claim that the self grows through social interactions because we grow up in a social context. And within this framework, the first social interaction that any individual has is with his or her mother, and it is so this interaction also in a way becomes a part of how the self is molded. And another difference that feminist philosophy takes, I mean, that is different from traditional philosophy is in taking into account the life experience of women along with the theories. So again, I have Simone de Beauvoir here, who says that human experiences are ambiguous in nature and they are embedded in historical, cultural, and interpersonal context. So when it comes to women, these experiences are overshadowed by oppression from that are centuries old. So and they do not have any encouragement to break free and be independent from this. So the self of a woman is always overshadowed by her social and cultural context. So the woman, according to de Beauvoir, is a label that is imposed on the female sex, the natural female sex by the society, and they can only gain independence. Okay, I think I'm repeating this point. They can only gain independence by and define their own selves by involving in productive projects. So in order to form a new definition of the self, feminist theorists mainly take the help of post-structuralism and psychoanalysis. So these two schools are considered for a specific reason, as these two schools do not look at the self as isolated from its environment as philosophers before have done. And also, they do not look at the body as a mere vehicle for the mind. They believe that the body also does play a role in defining the self. So Julia Kristeva is one of the philosophers who actually followed Freud. So Kristeva says that the self.
Well, Radhika, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Could you please wrap up now and conclude? Because we have to have some time for discussions also. Yeah.
Okay, so what I'm trying to say here is instead of phrasing this question as which is the right definition, I think what we need to ask is there a right definition that can describe the self in generalized terms? So I think there was another section in my paper where there are theorists like Weir and Griffiths who have continuously pointed out that the self cannot be generalized as a concept because it is unique for each individual. So you cannot arrive at one definition of the self. So in this conclusion, I would also like to reflect a little upon where the theories on self could go. So I mean, if we look at the atmosphere where we live, the socio-political atmosphere, the sense of belonging has somehow taken the central stage, especially along geographical lines, the land where you belong to. So maybe in the future, in another decade or two, we might have theories coming up taking this into consideration. And today we feel that maybe Kant and Miller were wrong to assume a universal subject to define the self. And down the centuries, we might again have people talking about how wrong we were in trying to find one right definition, or trying to find a definition at all, maybe. So yeah, I think that's the end of my presentation, and I really hope that I'll have all the answers to your questions, because it's quite a vast topic that I've chosen.
Yes, Radhika, thanks for that engaging discussion on the question of the self, a question, that is not a recent one. I mean, it's an age-old question, and, philosophical traditions have been grappling, philosophical traditions through across cultures, I would say, have been grappling with this question. So I was really enjoying your discussion. I hope I could have given you some more time. Just again, a couple of questions that really intrigued me. I mean, how do you categorize the self? Or in other words, do we really need such a categorization of the self? Because if the self comes to be gendered, then the entire question of rational agency may be actually denied. So that is my first question. The second one is, I mean, when we talk about, let's say, the Kantian rational subject, then how do we derive from that idea, this kind of a genderedness of that subject? And of course, misogynism is also something that I would like to ask you about, because in this entire question, where does misogynism feature? Because when we are thinking of the rational subject, then we really perhaps are not thinking in terms of gender, but the agency that that rational subject is capable of. So could you address these questions as to how the self can be really thought of in terms of gender? Does such a categorization help us retrieve the existential self and its identity? Don't you think it's a problem that perhaps is better that it remains unresolved? So yes, so Radhika, over to you.
Yes, so it is an interesting question whether we need to see the self along gendered lines, but especially looking at history, as you said, reason. Did women have access to reason before? I mean, today, as far as this aspect is concerned, maybe we are on more equal lines as far as gender is concerned. But before the late 18th century, when Kant and Miller had actually proposed these two prototypes, at that point, was reason, could men and women stand on equal grounds as far as reason is concerned? So I think the Kantian subject, reading the Kantian subject as a male is quite apt. I mean, at that point, maybe, especially with the first wave of feminism, that's when this whole thing came in of calling the Kantian subject a masculine concept, which completely excludes women.
So thank you for those questions. If I can ask just one question as a follow-up, because I have to go briefly. But my question is, after this very interesting exploration of yours, Radhika, which we could only partially follow because of the lack of time, I was wondering how you would respond to the notion of context. You've talked a lot about interesting thinkers, but the context, of course, of this talk is that it's not just simply Europe or North America, but it's also Asia and Africa and different parts of the world. So as someone who comes from South Asia, how is a South Asian perspective at all linked to your definition of feminism? And I guess if I had to ask a further question, I say, how do you include a view of a prominent South Asian feminist, namely Gayatri Spivak?
Radhika, are you there? Because Professor Bruce asks you a question, Radhika.
He lost the connection, perhaps.
Okay, might have lost the connection.
I apologize.
think
it was my fault for mentioning Gayatri Spivak.
Oh, no. It's an immensely interesting question, Professor. Don't worry. I'm really enjoying your questions. So please do pour in with your questions. I mean, that's exactly what makes the session really enlivening. So with that, we would turn to Sohini. I think she's there on the line.
Yes, I'm here. Good evening.
Great. Okay, Sohini, I would now turn to you. You are presenting on Is the Identity of Bengali Language and Her Dialects a Return of the Screw, a study of linguistic marginalization and distortion. Well,
yes.
Get yourself started. Yeah.
Yes. Just give me a second and I share my screen.
Yeah.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, it's perfectly visible.
Okay. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being present here to support me in the seminar in my presentation. I'm Sohini Dasgupta. I'm a postgraduate student at Center of German Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. And I'm here to present on the topic, Is the Identity of Bengali Language and its Dialect at a Turn of the Screw, a study of linguistic marginalization and distortion. First of all, before starting off with my presentation, I would like to bring forward a few information. Bengali is considered among the one of the 7 languages, which is most among the first 100 languages. It is the 7th language, which is one of the most spoken language in the world. And not only this, Bengali language has its language movement, identity movement back in 1952 against the Urdu hegemony in Bangladesh. This had also given rise to the International Mother Language Day, which UNESCO declared 21st February as the International Day of International Mother Language Day. So my question is, why so when Bengali is an internationally recognized language, why is this desired respect not given in her motherland? I would like to begin my presentation by singing 2 lines from the song sung by the warriors and martyrs of Bengali language movement back in 1952. Koi to jahai amar dadai, koi se tahai amar babai. এখন কও দেখি ভাই, এখন কও দেখি ভাই, মোর মুখে কি অন্য কথা শোভা পায়, ওরাই আমার মুখের ভাষা কাইরা নিতে চায়, ওরাই আমার মুখের ভাষা কাইরা নিতে চায়। With this, I come to the contents of my presentation. First of all, I would like to talk about the colonial history and its post-colonial relevance. Under this, I would talk about the language identity and Bengal Renaissance in the 18th and 19th century. Then I would come down to communalism and British India, which was prevalent in the early phases of 20th century, and the reception of Bengal partition, which is also in the 20th century. This resulted in a Bengali language movement in Bangladesh in 1952. And after the movement, we can still see in post-independent India and Bangladesh, there have not been any proper language policies. After that, I would come down to the contemporary challenges and threat to language, that is language and employment, anglicization of Bengali in digital world and media, fusion music and language, and of course, with that, I'll conclude. Okay, so the colonial history and its post-colonial relevance plays a language identity, and Bengal Renaissance plays a very important role in this. Bengal Renaissance was a period when Bengalis had intellectual consciousness and also linguistic awareness, which helped them translate more than 1400 books in the beginning of 20th century. And in 1980, Calcutta University had more than 27,000 students, making it one of the biggest universities in the world. With the maximum number of students. Also, multiple journals and scientific documents were translated. A lot of foreign literatures were also translated. What is of interest to me is that during this time a new language developed, that was the Promito Bangla. This Promito Bangla helped the educated elites to translate and to recreate its own history. This became a continuous threat to British India, of course, and I would also like to mention that there's a sort of social imitation which happens at this point. By social imitation, I mean that when the elites of the society are performing certain acts of education, I mean, they are getting educated, they are also reflecting that on the other general population. I would like to briefly quote here Basu and Amit. I quote, "Indeed, the demographic literature suggests that it is often this challenge in behavior among the elites that diffuse into the general population through what Clement and Wilson call social imitation. Social imitation changed the political face of Bengal and Calcutta, now Kolkata, being the capital of pre-independent India, posed a looming threat to the throne." So this neo-nationalistic consciousness in the huge topography of Bengal, which in the huge topography of Bengal. Sorry?
Yes, Rajiv, could the others be muted so that Sohini can continue to?
I muted. Susmita was, yes, Susmita, please do not. Okay.
Okay, great. Yeah, Sohini, please continue. Yeah.
So the neo-nationalist challenge, there was a neo-nationalist challenge which the British throne was facing. So they came up with this policy of divide and rule in 1904, which played a very important role in the whole perspective of language. This division of this policy of divide and rule would divide the Bengalis on the basis of religion. So although Bengalis, Hindus and Muslim Bengalis are united by the umbrella of language, they are divided by the British on the basis of religion. So communalism and British India. So there was a evident role of communalism that played during the British Raj in India, and communalism had led to the separation of Bangladesh from that of India, and there was a lot of migration from Bengal to Bangladesh and vice versa. This has affected in the later in the mother language movement in 1952, because educated elites who came from Bengal to Bangladesh had carried with them the whole idea of the language consciousness, which later formed the Bangladesh in 1972. Bangladesh formation was based on language movement. So this reception, the reception of Bengali language in particular was of this Bengal partition, the reception of the Bengal partition by the poets and the writers were taken off very critically. Kazi Nazrul Islam, in his poem, who is Bangladesh's national poet right now, mentions, "Mora eki brinতে দুটি কুসুম হিন্দু মুসলমান এক আকাশের মেয়ের কোলে যেন রবি শশী দোলে এক রক্তে বুকের তালে এক সে নারীর ডান." I translate, "We are two buds on the same stem, Hindu and Muslim. It is the same sky for us in the mother's lap. Swaying like the twin sun and the moon, our hearts share the same blood, so does our relation." Hrithik Ghatak, one of the most celebrated film directors, incidentally a migrant from East Bengal, also mentioned, "I have tackled the refugee problem as you have used the term, not as refugee. To me, it was a division of culture and I was shocked." The Rabindranath Tagore at this point in 1905 had taken up, as we already know, the massive Raksha Bandhan movement to unify the Hindus and Muslims across Bengal and Assam. So the result of Bengali language movement in 1952 and the lack of proper language policy in post-independent India had played a vital role, because India, as one must understand, is a linguistic mosaic. It has multiple languages, multiple sub-languages, dialects, etc. So it is very difficult in a multilingual nation like India to give importance to one language. But this has been done to us. Even in Bangladesh, which had as I already mentioned, in 1972, Bangladesh already had its independence on the basis of language, on the basis of language movement. We can see that official language of Bengali is still an official language of Bangladesh and still not a national language. But acquisition planning of Bangla has led the reception of Bangla through Bengali through education. But there's no clear corpus planning in this field in the independent Bangladesh. India has also been suffering through a similar situation, with more than 8.03% of Indian population speaking Bengali. The three-language policy of 1968 that was implemented by Lok Sabha is on a real ground level is scarcely implemented. Rather, multiple interest by the government to highlight standardizing Hindi is often noticed in the official spectrum. The Kanti Bishwas, ex-education minister of West Bengal, is of the view that the center, however, has a deliberate indifference regarding the local languages. And Chief Secretary of Government of West Bengal, Alapan Bandyopadhyay, is of the view that it is possible to bring official languages in the state administration, but an infrastructure is being developed. But the problem is, the lacuna he feels is inherent in the attitude of the colonized Bengalis, who still consider English to be the doorway to the world. So that leads to a problematic position. Also, the Union Home Minister's tweet on September 2019, 14th September 2019, mentions, I quote, it was necessary to have a common language that becomes a mark of identity of the country. Today, if one language can do the work of uniting the country, then it is the most spoken language, Hindi. This is a problematic position we can take when we, in a multilingual country like India, when we start putting a single language as an identity. So the contemporary challenges and threats that are being faced by the Bengali speakers are in the field of language and employment. First of all, a comparative analysis of 2011 and 2001 census report on migrant by the place of last residence, duration of residence, and reasons of migration posts that there's almost a 4 times growth in the total number of people displaced from 2001 to 2011. A total number of 16,56,952 people have been migrated from urban and rural India. Of course, the corporate language policies and globalization also plays a very important role here. The single language models by the corporate has not only affected countries like India, but also has affected grown up and developed countries like Denmark. In my paper, I have dealt with these topics in details. Also anglicization of Bengali in digital world and media. So the recent anglicized language trend is also a potential threat to Bengali script. The new messaging lexicon is more direct in the anglicized Bengali and is often a mixture of alphabets, numbers, and words. This new language is called Benglish. It is often used in networking sites and networking apps, for example, WhatsApp. So here, this Tumi Kamon Acho is a language that would be used in the messaging apps by a more contemporary user of the language. But if it would be used by a Promito Bangla speaker of the Renaissance period, it would probably not have these alphabet and word mixtures. This also brings us to a new question of what is formal, what is informal in the whole space of texting languages. What is the language of the text and how does it matter? Also, Netflix, Amazon Prime, and the diminishing identity is also another new threat that the Bengali language and other languages are also facing. Netflix on Amazon Prime and other videos, if we look at these networks, we would find there's a whole lot of international series that are coming up, but there's a lack of regional Bengali or regional Marathi or any sort of regional language. There's lack of programs and lack of shows of regional language, which is problematic again.
Okay, Sohini, yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt. Could you please now move towards your conclusion, because we would be then having some time for the questions. You can just show our the slides to us,
Yes.
the ones that you have prepared. Yeah.
Yeah. The next thing is translation.
We cannot hear you.
Can it not be heard? Sorry.
No. I think
I do not know how to connect the audio. But anyway, my point on this slide was that the sort of translation that is being used in this slide, in this advertisement, is a very poor translation. If we see, they are using a term called Tazgi Dhoom Dharaka, which they are poorly translating as Tortaja Dhoom Dharaka, which has no meaning in Bengali. Which makes no sense. So could Colgate Palmolive not hire a better translator, or can Bengalis not translate? This is a new question of post-colonial movement, I think, which we can think on. Again, the fusion music. I do not know why this cannot be heard. I would be heard.
No problem, Sohini. You can, yes.
I'm sure people are aware of this song. I'm sure people are aware of this song. This song, Boroloker Biti Rog, had incurred high penalty because it was a folk song sung by Ratan Kahar in 1972, and for which Badshah had not given an acknowledgement. But what is more objectionable is that in the name of art, the song has been choreographed in a lecherous, sickening mode, exhibiting poor respect towards women. Such choreographic linguistic objectification of a simple folk song is only a pointer to the humiliating and objectifying intention towards language, culture, and their women. And this also shows a deep-rooted arrogance and prejudice against the culture. With this, I come to the conclusion of my presentation. What I find very important to discuss is, because of this shift in the language, and with people with native speakers not refusing to speak the language, what would happen to the intergenerational transmission of language? Multilingualism, which connects the world and enriches culture, would that be at a threat? If globalization overlooks the cultural and linguistic diversity, it is the job of the language policies to find out an alternative way in the spheres of education policies and academic curriculum and material production. Also, standardized Bengali with a huge number of speakers at the international level, it is indeed something to worry that despite this sort of a standardized place for Bengali, if that language is at threat, which is one of the one of the major language, what would happen to the dialects of Bengalis and the minor languages if multilingualism is not given respect and is not integrated in our policies? Thank you. With that, I come to my presentation. I would love to take questions.
Okay, fine. That was fantastic, Sohini, listening to you, and such a true and a convincing voice on this fundamental problem that the Bengali language that Bangla, in fact, is facing now. So I was really thrilled to listen to you, and you know, that thrill is so compelling that you know, that now drives me to ask you a couple of questions. Firstly, since you are researching in this very I mean, in this very essential area of you know, let's say the diminishing of importance of one of the most important languages in the country. So what do you think can be really done to confront the socio-political, the socio-cultural, and the socio-political factors that are affecting the identity of Bangla? I mean, don't you feel that some kinds of policies at the governmental levels, I mean, both central and state, I mean, need to be adopted in order to restore and give the language its due place, right? So this is one. And the other question is, I mean, don't you also feel that the kind of new language, I would say, the new language form that is emerging from, you know, the social media platforms, one of the examples of which you did show us in a slide of yours towards the end, you know, so this new form of language is perhaps also affecting the identity and purity of the language. I mean, don't you feel it that way? Right. So these are the two questions that I have. Yeah, please go ahead.
Absolutely, as I was already talking in my conclusion, that there is a need for material formations on basing it on the language. I mean, every culture must have its own different curricular and material, and also there must be corpus planning in India on the level of policies to give it, importance to the whole situation. And also the three language policy must also be more we should also strongly what can I say, implement. We can also strongly implement the three language policy, which is not at school levels if we see. And of course, I agree to you that there is a change with the language of messaging language that I was talking about. I find it very problematic, because often this sort of a lexicon that is developing, we confuse it ourselves. I mean, we often question people or talk to people in formal situation with these informal lexicon. So this is also creating an imbalance in the social structure, and so that is again problematic, the whole idea between formal and informal language.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, great. So I would now turn to the audience. If anybody has a question for Sohini
I have a
on the
question.
issue, please go ahead. Yes, yes, please, sir.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. The literature shows that what they call subtractive bilingualism is disadvantage for the society. That means when people leave their mother tongue and shift to another language, and they just leave their mother tongue language, there's a disadvantage. So you mentioned there are a lot of what's needed is a policy at the level of the government. But do you think also it's the job of the society to be at the forefront? Because when language diminishing, what you can, something that you can remedy is through the and advancing its status or the economic advantage. So is there a social movement to restore the credibility of or the value of the Bengali language? Thank you.
Of course, there was a social movement, as I already mentioned, in 1952. There was a Bengali language movement which had made which had given international, which had put Bengali language as one of the very important languages in the world. Again, giving importance to the mother language identity, resulting in the on 21st February Mother Language Day. So it is, of course, there this sort of a social movement in the past, but it is very that is what actually brings me to this presentation, that despite having a language movement, despite fighting for language, dying, creating a country out of language, why are we still not in that position where we can claim that this language is ours? We are more into the whole sphere of we can speak Bengali, we can speak English, we can speak Hindi. We are in the multilingual mental space, I would say. And as Bengalis, I know as my culture that we are very open-minded to a lot of culture, and I have also discussed this in my paper, that we are very open to multilingualism. So that is again a threat to Bengali itself, because it is so accepting as a culture. That's what.
Okay, fine. Okay. Thank you for the question, sir. Thanks, Sohini, for the answer. We'll just take one more question over here that Anand asks. Anand's previous question could not be taken. Sorry for that, Anand, because the speaker actually went offline. We lost her due to some internet connection problems. So, but this question, of course, we are in a position to take. Currently in India, Anand asks, most of elementary education medium and almost entirely higher education medium is dominated by English, and we find and we seldom find good books, research papers, movies, etc. in regional languages. So these issues have been repeatedly raised in South India. So how can we revive regional languages, and cause them to emerge as formal languages? So that's what he asked. Yeah.
It is a very interesting question. To me, thank you, Anand, for the question. To me, I think the use of folk music to teach the younger generation, and implementing and incorporating cultural elements of the text, of Bengali text, and introducing us to the culture, I think would enhance our interest in culture, which would in long term help in the revival of regional languages, folk culture, folk stories, something from where we come, the culture that makes us, the myth that makes us, I would rather say.
Okay, fantastic. So thank you all for the extremely riveting papers. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed all the papers. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the session couldn't have been really better. And the beauty of the session was, you know, we had papers from across cultures, and we really got to you know, really receive and understand the nuances of these cultures, you know, starting from Amrit's paper on Mirza Ghalib's poetry concerning love and the self, and then Najam's very interesting paper on the declining role of the Pashtun communal hujra, and then you see Radhika's paper on the self, and then Sohini's paper on the identity of Bengali language. So we have found that, you know, the very element of identity and the self have remained, you know, quintessential to all these papers. And I hope all the four presenters would carry on their research. They are doing a great job, and I would really wish to see them carry their research ahead and do, you know, a great task that is there for them to accomplish in the future. So with those words, I congratulate all the brilliant speakers of this session. And I mean, it was extremely enriching and experience with chairing this session, of course, and I thank Rajiv wholeheartedly for this. I mean, the speakers couldn't have been better, Rajiv. It was really wonderful. So over to you, Rajiv. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor Banerjee, and for sharing this session, and all the presenters. I mean, I just wanted to say this to Sohini. Sohini, if she would have informed me that she is going to sing the Bengali song, I would have given a background music. But thank you very much for singing rather than just reading out. Thank you very much. And again, today, I mean, I really got stuck with the line of Professor Lawrence that he said, like, you know, it was a wonderful hearing different voices, and that has still, I mean, somewhere stuck in my mind. So thank you very much, all of you from different part of country,
Yeah.
and participating this symposium. And tomorrow we are going to have our again the session we have on time. I'm sorry for this. So again today, I'm sorry for this. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
We'll see again tomorrow, and we have started with the vision of this symposium, as in the very beginning we mentioned, and all the panelists that has given insight of understanding of this symposium. So I would like to conclude with this, that this symposium, or even like Umran, is not just like, you know, to organize a symposium or doing a charity or just like, you know, an NGO. Rather, it's a wisdom. It's a process. It is Umran. So I hope that you, with this symposium, we will develop this understanding of Umran for a better society, a better humanity. We cannot make a perfect society, but at least we will always be making a better society. So, my dear friends, thank you very much, and dear professor, we'll see you again tomorrow. And thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you too, Rajiv. And thank you all the presenters and the members of the audience. Hope to see you all tomorrow. Please be there with us. Yeah, thank you all.
Masalama, namaste.
Thank you, Rajiv. Thank you, Maushami ma'am.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.